We all ready to get started?
Yes.
All right, so RDA still images is what we will talk about today. And if you cataloged in the past using AACR2, you probably remember the term graphic materials. So this would be the same type of resource. There we go. So the scope of this presentation, we're going to step through a couple of different examples of graphic materials. We're going to look at a poster for The Black Cat, a movie from the 1930s, I think it was, an art original with the title Common Loons. And there will be a couple of other examples sprinkled throughout, such as a map, for example. So we will go through and do this in the current RDA order. So we'll be looking at manifestations and items first, because that's what we start with when we describe something. And then we will go on to the description of works and expressions, look at agents, attributes of person and corporate body, and then look at how we record relationships. So I wanted to start with a definition first, so we can come to a shared understanding of what we're talking about and what we're looking at. And I should also mention as we go through, if you've got questions, feel free to post those in the chat box. And in the lower right, you'll see a slide number. It's helpful if you can mention the slide number if your question relates to a slide, because if I go a couple more slides and come back, that will make it easier to look at the context of your question. So still image resources are a content type consisting of content expressed through line, shape, shading, etc., intended to be perceived visually as a still image or images in 2 dimensions. So our typical pictures, digital images, lithographs, paintings and reproductions, photographs, wall charts and posters, that sort of thing. So these are our common visual resources. So if you're thinking in terms of a WorldCat record type, you would choose visual resources in your work form for cataloging those types of resources. Then there are plenty of other resources that can also have or be primarily still images, as well as other types of content. So a resource can have multiple content types. Art books that are primarily images are a really good example, as are exhibition catalogs. So the content of those are primarily the images of the paintings, or even if they're photographs of 3-dimensional objects like sculptures and things like that. Cartographic resources such as aerial photos, or some other type of map that is meant to be perceived as a picture in some way. Tactile images that are perceived through touch. All of these are also types of still images. So while you may use a different cataloging work form in your connection client or whatever your MARC editor is, when you choose the type term, you can still use still image as a content type for those types of resources. When you start to catalog these types of resources, you need to make a decision whether you are doing a comprehensive or analytical description. So a comprehensive description is something that describes the whole resource. And so that might be a book, for example, that is full of images of one particular artist's paintings, for example. An analytical description would be if you take one page out of that book and catalog that one page, the image that's on that page. So that would be your analytical description. And then you would have a relationship that would say that it is coming out of or is part of that book that you're referring to. So when we say comprehensive versus analytical, we're talking about whether we're cataloging the whole or one piece of a whole. Preferred sources of information. So when you have your resource and are looking at information to provide a title proper, a publication information, statement of responsibility, these types of things, you want to find some source that is appropriate to the whole if you are using or creating a comprehensive description, or a source that is appropriate to the part selected for an analytical description. So an example would be the title page of a book for a comprehensive description, or if you are cataloging an art original, maybe there's a plate that has been affixed to the frame, or information that has been written and maybe on a sticker or something that is pasted to the back of the frame itself. An analytical description, there may be a caption under the image that you are cataloging. So these are the appropriate places that you want to look for. If you've got things that are like a pile of sheets, let's say you've got a portfolio, like an envelope that's full of different posters, and you want to catalog it as a comprehensive description, you would probably be looking at the title sheet if it has that, or otherwise the container itself. So if there is a title sheet or title page, title leaf, title card, something like that, then that is a preferred source of information for, in particular, a comprehensive description, and you should take your title information and much of your other information as much as possible from that same source. If there isn't something like that, then you would use the most appropriate and comprehensive resource of the title and other information that you can find. And a note for you to keep in mind right now, if the title proper comes from the a title sheet, title page, title leaf, or title card, you do not need a note to state the source of the title. We'll talk about other sources in just a minute, but when we move to the RDA 3R revision that's happening now, everything that we catalog will require a source of title regardless of what kind of resource it is. So something to look forward to in the future. So a source of title for other resources, if it's not pages, sheets, cards, or leaves, then it's something else. And for anything else like that, particularly two-dimensional still images, you are probably going to need either the permanently affixed label or some other source that is part of that resource for your source of title and other information. Or if it's digital and there isn't any identifying information that you can see visually, then you would look at your embedded metadata and see if you can get any information out of that. So if you take information from other sources, so some source that is outside of the resource itself, such as the list that you see here, so these are the ones that RDA identifies as requiring some sort of indication that they come from outside the resource itself. These are the title, the statement of responsibility, edition statement, numbering of serials, any of your production, publication, distribution, or manufacture statements, and series statements. And what RDA tells us is that either identify that you took it somehow using a note or some other indicator. And that some other indicator, the Library of Congress has declared we will just use square brackets. And so following along with LC practice, that's what you see in current cataloging. So when information comes from outside of the resource itself for any of these specific elements, then they will have square brackets, except for the title proper. If the title proper is coming from outside the resource itself, you will not use square brackets. You'll never use square brackets in the 245 title proper information. You will instead have a note that says where the title came from. All other information, the statement of responsibility, addition, numbering, etc., if it comes from outside the resource itself, the only thing you need to do is put it into square brackets. You do not need to declare where you took that information from. So there are also resources that have no title, and then you as the cataloger need to devise a title. Older terminology would be title supplied by cataloger, and that term supplied in RDA is more about you taking information from some other source and supplying it in the record, which is why they have moved to devised, because it's you, the cataloger, actually constructing and creating this title proper. So when you need to construct a title, devise a title, what you want to do is to make sure that your devised title indicates either the nature of the resource or its subject or some combination of the two, whatever is appropriate. So if you've got a poster of Hansel and Gretel, then you would use the subject, which is Hansel and Gretel, and the nature, which is poster, combine those and you have your title. And then you would have a note that says that you devised the title devised by cataloger. That's all that you need to do. There may be maps where there are no title. For example, these are good examples of still images. You've got a map, there's no title, but you know the date of the situation, you know the location, so you can put all of those things together and say it's a map of this place with this particular date. And then notice that these title propers have no brackets. So here, these are the two resources that I mentioned at the beginning that we will be most of our examples as we step through the different attributes and elements in this particular presentation. The first one on the left is the black cat. So it's a poster advertising a movie. And then on the right, we've got an art original. So in real life, that painting is in color. So this is a black and white image of that. And if you look at the poster in teeny tiny print, which doesn't come out on this picture, we see a copyright date, and we see a location, and we see an agency responsible for publishing that particular poster. On the back side of the painting, we have this information of a title, and then the medium of the artwork and who painted it and the date. So these are our preferred sources when we can get them directly out of the resource itself. So just look around, scan around, and see what you can find for that type of information. So each of our core elements, which are going to be our basic ones like title, statement of responsibility, edition statement, publication statement, series statement, these are our core elements, and we'll see as we go through the slides, if something is core, then I will identify it with that word. You want to usually, I've condensed how you would locate the source of information for these different elements into this kind of pithy statement here. So take whatever your element is, take that element from the following sources in order of preference. So once you identify your title proper, wherever that source is, then that's the source that you want to use for the majority of your core elements. So the statement of responsibility, if it's on that same source with the title, you want to take it from there. The publisher name, if it's on that same source, you want to take it from there. So that's how that works. If it doesn't exist in that same source that you found the title proper, then you would look at some other source within the resource itself. We're talking about still images, which are usually going to be probably one piece of paper or one flat something or other card, canvas, something like that. The resource itself is going to be pretty simple to inspect, right? So that'll be a little easier to identify. If you can't take it from within the resource itself, then you can go to some other sources that are specified under 2.2.4 RDA. So these would be things like a publisher's website or reference, some sort of reference material. So if you've got a painting and there is a book that talks about paintings by a particular painter, that's a reference source that you could use as a source of information. So it's that type of thing. The exceptions to the source of the title proper being the source of your other elements are for the series title. You want to take that from the series title page first, if that is an option. Otherwise, it goes in that same order of the list above. For places of publication, you want to prefer the same source as the name of the publisher. Copyright, identifiers, content types, you can use any source of information. So it doesn't matter where that comes from, even if it's your own knowledge. And then the extent, the carrier, the media type, all of that will be evidence that is presented by the resource itself. So you will deduce it or put it together, for example. So here we've got a title proper. We're looking at that particular section of the poster there on the left, and it says the Edgar Allan Poe's Black Cat, and that's what we, Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat. I read it the wrong way. So that's what we would put down as our title proper. Again, on the back side of that painting, we see common loons, and so that's what we would use for the title proper of that particular painting. Remember that capitalization is an institutional and cataloger's choice. So when you see that little dog-eared page over here, that is something to keep in mind, that you want to make sure that you, as an institution, create documentation that says, we will do original cataloging this way. We will either follow the Appendix A, where we capitalize proper nouns and the first word of the title. We will capitalize the way that it looks, that sort of thing. So make sure that you create documentation so that you can follow those types of things consistently. You may come across copy cataloging where your institutional preference doesn't match what you see. That's okay. It's best to just accept what you see and don't worry about changing it. So for the note on the title proper, if the title proper does not come from a title page, sheet, leaf, or card, or if we're dealing with moving images, which is not going to apply for anything we're talking about today, then you must supply a note on the source of the title proper. So just use simple language, title from backside of painting, title from poster, however it works best. This is a note for, not for users, patron users, it's for catalogers, other catalogers, so that they know what you are looking at to determine the title proper. And again, when we get to the new revision at some point in the next year or two, all resources will require a note. And I want to pause for a minute and talk about the MARC coding for that particular note. Those of us who have been cataloging for a long time have used the 500 field for that particular note. 500 is a general note and is used for many different types of notes that go in bibliographic descriptions. The 588 field is a newer field. It's probably about 10 years old at this point. It was proposed by the serials catalogers as a structured note field that is specific to defining source of information for a title or a description. Either of these fields are okay to use. You can continue to use a 500 field, or you can use a 588 field. The reason that a 588 field might be preferred is that it provides structured data. So the 588 field we can look at, and the computer can know that the information in that 588 field refers to the title proper specifically because of that field. A 500 field, we don't know what that content is because it's not structured, it's not defined. It's just a general note that may be about anything. And one of the things that RDA is supporting and moving toward is structured data, so that as we move into the semantic web world, our data that we take out of MARC into, let's say, BibFrame, can be more succinctly defined. So a 588 field in that sense is something that would be preferred because it's easily identifiable by the computer as to what it is. So variant titles, transcribed titles that differ from in whatever way, as much as is needed. If we look at the black cat poster, we can start from the top and use all of the words that we see. Carl Laemmle presents Karloff and Bela Lugosi in Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat. So all of that information is completely fine for a variant title. And of course, we also want to have a 246 for just Black Cat, so that we can get it by the title without the preamble and the names. So whatever variant titles make the most sense, that's what you want to do. For your statement of responsibility, and keep in mind that some of these may not have a statement of responsibility, and that's okay, or the statement of responsibility may be part of the title proper, that's okay as well. Record what you see, the way that you see it. So for the black cat, there is no overt statement of who is responsible for the poster itself. And so we just end at the end of the title, the black cat, right, period. And that's all we need. It's okay to not have a statement of responsibility. And then for the painting, we see a pastel by Carol D. Danbaum, and that is what we transcribe into the statement of responsibility field. So addition statement, keep in mind that an addition statement should be something that applies to the resource as a whole. So if you're doing an analytical description of something and the whole resource has an addition statement, that addition statement will not be present on the analytical description because it applies to the whole, not to that one piece. This particular map that we've got, or it's when you look through a telescope, everything is reversed. And so this is a field map of the moon in reverse image so that you can look at it and see it the same way as you're seeing it through the telescope. So mirror image, and then we can supply the word addition in square brackets to make it clear that, that this is an addition statement. That is something that's not terribly necessary with RDA. You can just give the addition term as is. So we could just say mirror image, period. But if you really need the clarity, it is okay to supply the word addition or version as is necessary. And this would be a core element. Production statement. So if you have still images that are unpublished, and these would particularly apply to art originals, you will have a production statement. The only piece of the production statement that is core is the date. So we will give that in a 264 field with a second indicator 0, and then subfield C for the date, and just give the dates as found. If it gives a full date, like September 9th, 1982, then that's what you would record in subfield C. So take what you see, don't limit just to the year, give the full date as it appears in that subfield C. If it's published, then we'll go ahead and use a 264 field with a second indicator 1. So give the place as you see it there, Corte Madera, California, all spelled out. This is Portal Publications Ltd, and so that's what we transcribe into the subfield B. There is no date of publication, but there is a copyright date. So when there's no date of publication, we can infer a date of publication by using that copyright date. And when we do that, we just put that date in square brackets. So that's the easiest way to do that. We also know that this poster is a reproduction of the original one from the 30s when the movie actually came out. So that's a helpful part of that. For copyright date, is a core element for the Library of Congress, which makes sense because they also hold the Copyright Office itself. And it is something that, as a general practice, we as catalogers in North America continue to provide. So go ahead and give that copyright date if it is present. You will never supply a copyright date. If you know that there is a copyright date, but it is not present on the resource itself, you can certainly give it, but it would never go in square brackets. Use the 264 field with a second indicator 4. It goes in a subfield C, either using the copyright symbol itself or the word copyright. You do not need a space between the symbol and the date. Just use the copyright symbol and the date, and you're good to go. In the work form and connection, there are 2 date fields. So keep in mind that your date status, the DTST that you see, will have the code T when you've got a publication date and a copyright date, regardless of whether your pub date is inferred or not. And then you would just record the publication date in the date 1 field and the copyright date in the date 2 field. So for series statements, this is a series statement that we see on these different puzzle cards. They're a set for children to use for vocabulary, and they're sold under this collective title called Language Acquisition Puzzles. So the series doesn't appear on the puzzle. And so according to RDA, we should supply that series title in square brackets in the 490 field. So that's what we would do, is use square brackets. That's the general practice. If that bothers you in any way, it's also acceptable to also provide a note instead. So give the series title Language Acquisition Puzzles without square brackets, and then just give a source of that particular of that particular series statement. So that follows the instructions that are given. Either tell us where you got it or mark it in some way, which would be the square brackets. If perchance the title proper for these puzzles or something that you also had to supply a note for, you could combine those source of title and proper and source of series title proper notes in the same 588 field. So you don't need separate ones. You could combine them into the same one. Oops, sorry, I missed a slide. Identifier for the manifestation. So here we've got a poster for the atom. And if we look on the teeny tiny print in the lower left corner, we see CD-5912. And we know that the publisher of this particular poster is called Mark Twain Media. So if you've got some sort of catalog number identifier, you can use the 028 field. You want to be sure that you look that particular tag up in the MARC format and code the first and second indicators appropriately. There are a multitude of choices for that, so don't agonize over them. Just choose the one that makes the most sense for the type of identifier that you find. So CD5912, that is a type of catalog number, right? So that's a pretty easy one to identify. You may also find, it's unlikely on still images, but of course an ISBN. So if there happens to be an ISBN, which you might find on a set of posters or sheets or something like that on the container, you would give that in a 020 field. Just remember that you have to omit the letters ISBN and the hyphens that happen between the numbers. And a reminder that the X in an ISBN is the Roman numeral 10. So it's not a letter, it's a number and needs to be part of the ISBN field itself. Media type, you would use unmediated for most still images because you don't need any type of mediation to make use of them. If that's not the case, like if you're cataloging digital images, of course, then you would use computer as your media type. For your carrier type, oh, I apologize about the, I was trying to use these pretty little icons that they use and they just get all messed up, and I thought I had fixed that one and I missed it. The carrier type, once you've determined your media type, when you look at the list in RDA for carrier type, it's sorted by the various media. So you would look for unmediated carriers, and it would give you a list of appropriate terms for a carrier type. So if you've got a poster, for example, you would use sheet. If you've got something smaller that's in the line of a card, then you would use that term. If you've got a book of paintings, for example, you would go ahead and use volume. So use the one that is most appropriate for whatever you are cataloging. And then whatever that term is, except for volume, whatever that term is, you will use as your extent most of the time. But the RDA lets us use an appropriate term from the following list here. The latest revision of RDA, I think, has removed this list completely. So this is from an older revision, but it's still a handy chart to look at. We've got activity card, chart. Keep in mind that chart is like your the periodic table where you've got your atoms, something really big that hangs on the wall. That's what a chart is. Collage, drawing, flashcard, icon painting, etc. So for our common loon example, we're going to use painting. For the black cat poster, we're going to use the term poster as we go through and create our extent. So our examples that we're using in the slides, the extent term in the 300 subfield A, one poster or one painting. Here are some other examples that you might find: 4 activity cards, 3 wall charts, so however many you have, and then the term that's most appropriate. If you cannot in some way ascertain the exact number, you can certainly approximate, and then you would just use the word approximately 1,000 photographs as an example. Dimensions. So when you record the dimensions, you're recording the pictorial area. So the height from top to bottom, when you look at it in reading position, and then followed by the width left to right. So when we talk about the pictorial area, that means, for example, the loon, the common loon painting, what we are measuring is the part that is inside the frame, not the frame itself. And so as we can see, the painting is the pictorial area is 32 by 43 centimeters, and then the frame itself is 50 top to bottom by 60 centimeters left to right. So that's what we mean by pictorial area, is without the frame. Base material. So some things that you will want to consider as you go through. You can put these into a 300 field. You can do it as a English language note in a 500 field. There's also a tag where you can put them in specific subfields and set them up for a linked data type of environment. So it would actually end up being your choice which one that you want to do with these things. Regardless of what you would do, I would recommend also including the tags for, there are 3 XX tags that you would look up, and encoding those for moving into a linked data environment at some point in the future. So your base material, whatever it might be, paper, canvas for the painting, that type of thing, just use a term that works for that as your base material. Your applied material, so this is what you see applied to that base material. So we know that the common loon is a pastel. So maybe it's egg tempera paint, maybe it's pastel paint, maybe it's graphite, maybe it's plaster, ink, charcoal, whatever it might be that's applied. You don't need an applied material for the poster that's been printed. That part is not needed. If it's mounted in any way, give a term or description in very concise terms as much as you can for the mount. So if you've got, let's say, a globe, maybe it's on a brass stand, and that can go in a 500 field. For the content type, you are of course going to use still image. If you're using connection client from WorldCat, then you also have the ability to use those macros that will fill these content, media, and carrier terms in for you, and supply the correct vocabulary, supply the correct coding in subfield B, for example. So I really recommend using that when you're doing original or copy cataloging where you need to adjust those. Summarization of the content will go in field 520, so give a nice short summary of what's going on in your still image. Illustrative content, this is usually something that we don't need in for still images because it is an illustrated element. So when the primary content is illustrated, you will not have illustrations in your 300 subfield B. So what I'm pointing out here is that actually won't exist for your still images, that illustrations. But you will have the word color or black and white or polychrome or monochrome, which I think are the newer terms that have been added to RDA. So those would go in 300 subfield B. If it's sepia or some other type of coloring, you can also give that. Keep in mind that the spelling, so in English, we don't have the U in color. In the rest of the Anglo world, they do. So if you're doing copy cataloging and you see it spelled with C-O-L-O-U-R, leave that as it is, don't edit that. Sometimes still images will have scale. So if there is a scale that is given, then go ahead and provide that in the 507 field. You can either do it as a ratio, like 4:1, or you can give it in English language terms, 4 times larger than life size, for example. So this would be, you would see this if you've got something that is looking at, let's say, something that's microscopic, and they give you the scale for that. Go ahead and provide it in a 507 field. If there is something that you know has scale, but scale is not given, you can either approximate that or you can simply say scale not given. For the title of the work, for a lot of things that don't have an agent as a creator that we can identify, we will just have the name, the title, as the identifier, and that may conflict with other resources in the catalog that also use that same title to identify them. So the Black Cat is a movie, so there will be an identifier in the catalog for the Black Cat motion picture 19XX, whatever year that actually is, or Black Cat television program exists, and so that already is in there. So you will need to make sure that you follow the instructions in 6.27.1.9 RDA, which tells you how to create a title that identifies the work and gives you options for additions to add to that title. Usually we're going to add the form of work, which is what we've done here, poster in parentheses. So Black Cat poster, this makes it a unique identifier for that particular work and differentiates it from Black Cat the television program, Black Cat the movie, Black Cat the puppet. So the list can go on and on. So if your title proper is not unique, then you will need title of the work that will go in a 130 field. This is assuming that there's no creator, no agent of creation in a 100 field. You'd have that title proper in a 130 field, followed by, in parentheses, one or more terms that serve to make that a unique identifier. So relationships. There are 2 types. There's structured and there's unstructured. Unstructured is just your basic English language note. And structured is going to be where we add this information in a 700 field for something that was created by a person, 710 for something created by a corporate body, or 730 for something that doesn't have a creator that we can identify. So the Black Cat poster, we can add a relationship that it's based on the work by Edgar Allan Poe, Black Cat. So here we've got a 700 field that identifies that. The 730 field here shows that this poster is complementing the movie from 1934. So it's complemented by Black Cat motion picture 1934. So these relationships are things that you can identify. If they're readily identifiable, go ahead and provide them. The same thing for the agents. This Dan Baum Carol D actually should have subfield E artist after it. I have omitted that by mistake. I apologize. I will fix that and update these slides for you. So the link that you have will work and provide that updated example. This is an example of an unstructured relationship, again, a 500 field that just says it's reproduction of a poster for the 1934 motion picture by Universal Pictures. And then we've got an example record for the black cat here. We've got the title of the work, Black Cat Poster, the title proper, Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Hat. We've got multiple variant titles. We've got our publication and copyright information, etc. And then at the bottom here, we've got some 700 fields for the actors that are actually appearing in that particular poster. But when we look at Appendix I of RDA, which provides us with terms that identify the relationship between an agent and the resource that's being described, such as author or actor or that type of thing, there are no terms that will work to identify the relationship between, say, Boris Karloff and his image in that poster. So he's not an actor in the poster, he's just an image in that poster, right? So when you can't readily identify a term or a relationship, then you will not have a subfield E that follows those particular names. And then here's our common loon. And then we can see here the subfield E artist that provides that relationship between Dan Baum and the work that she created. And then here we've got the study upon which that particular painting was based, was used as inspiration. And then a couple notes about digital graphic images, still images. You can still use your extent will be one online resource because that's what we would use in RDA. And then in parentheses, you can say one digital photograph, one digital image, whatever term makes the most sense for you to have it be more specific. It can still be one online resource and be maybe 5 digital photographs, for example. The color of your still image can include grayscale or black and white for your grayscale digital images. Remember that hosting bodies are not distributors, so don't confuse them as the same. And your identifier may include a file name for those. So with your digital file characteristics, you want to make sure that you include the image, the file type, which would be an image file, the encoding format, which is probably going to be TIFF or JPEG, the file size in kilobytes, megabytes, or gigabytes, and if there is a resolution, then you would include that as well. So with the encoding format, file size, and resolution, you would supply that information when it is readily ascertainable. So here's an example. All of that goes into a 347 field. If you look at the metadata for that particular digital image, then you can see that what the file size is. You can see that it's a JPEG. You can see what the image size is and the resolution and such. So that's where you can get that particular information. And we've got about 10 minutes left now for questions. So if you have any of those, go ahead and add them into the chat box. Darlene, you're welcome. And you have my email address as well, so if you've got questions that come up later, feel free to ask. Well, that's great, Janet. Thanks. So it sounds like there might be no questions for the moment, which is fine. Again, if you've got any questions, my email address is there, 2 N's at the end of my name, at gmail.com, and I would be happy to follow up on anything you might have.